The scripture reading is taken from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 7, verses 36 to 50. When one of the Pharisees invited Jesus to have dinner with him, he went to the Pharisee's house and reclined at the table. A woman in that town who lived a sinful life learned that Jesus was eating at the Pharisee's house. So she came there with an alabaster jar of perfume. As she stood behind him at his feet, weeping, she began to wet his feet with her tears. Then she wiped them with her hair, kissed them, and poured perfume on them. When the Pharisee who had invited him saw this, he said to himself, "If this man were a prophet, he would know who is touching him and what kind of woman she is, that she is a sinner." Jesus answered him, "Simon, I have something to tell you." "Tell me, teacher," he said. Two people owed money to a certain moneylender. One owed him 500 denarii and the other 50. None of them had the money to pay him back, so he forgave the debts of both. "Now, which of them will love him more?" Simon replied, "I suppose the one who had the bigger debt forgiven." "You have judged correctly," Jesus said. Then he turned to the woman and said to Simon, "Do you see this woman? I came into your house. You did not give me any water for my feet, but she wet my feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair. You did not give me a kiss, but this woman, from the time I entered, has not stopped kissing my feet. You did not put oil on my head, but she has poured perfume on my feet. Therefore, I tell you, her many sins have been forgiven, as her great love has shown. But whoever has been forgiven little, loves little." Then Jesus said to her, "Your sins are forgiven." The other guests began to say amongst themselves, "Who is this who even forgives sins?" Jesus said to the woman, "Your faith has saved you. Go in peace." Luke chapter 7, verses 36 to 50. This is the word of the Lord.
Wayne's better hot.
Please be seated. Thank you, Katrina. Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Hope Church. My name is Drew. I'm one of the pastors here, and we have actually been in this message series on the Gospel of Luke. We've actually been exploring these different stories about the person of Jesus from eyewitness accounts, and Luke himself was a historian. And the Gospel accounts are these eyewitness accounts of what Jesus taught as well as what he did. And so here's the thing. If you're new to faith, or maybe you're someone who you've been wondering about faith yourself, I just want you to know that the core of the Christian faith is centered around this person, Jesus. So this is actually a great sermon series to join in, because you actually get clued in on what did Jesus actually say and what did he do and what does that mean for our lives today. And so we've been looking at these different episodes and accounts in the Gospel of Luke of what Jesus said and what he did. And hopefully what you'll find is an incredibly compelling picture. And there's a reason why this movement that has spanned generations and is worldwide, why it's swept us all up into kind of this belief in who this Jesus person is. Now, churches, though, may not be the best expressions of the teachings of Jesus. We often fall short in so many significant ways. Even within the country, it's difficult sometimes to stomach some of the ways that Christians do not stand for the teachings of Jesus, even though they might claim to. But again, from us, what does it look like to look at the teachings of Jesus? What does he have to say? And how relevant is it to our own lives? Now, look at how a theme that continues to emerge in the Gospel of Luke. It actually comes very early on, and this passage was preached on a few weeks ago. Jesus, in his hometown of Nazareth, he goes to this synagogue in this small little town of Nazareth, which is maybe a few hundred people. And so the synagogue community, when he gets up to stand in the synagogue, is probably even smaller than that. And he actually reads from this text in Isaiah, who was a prophet. And in the book of Isaiah, he reads this messianic, now a Messiah figure was who the Jews, who were a people under captivity. They were looking for deliverance, and these prophetic words would come about a Messiah that would help deliver them. Now notice what it says. He says, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me because he has anointed me." Now this is Jesus reading from Isaiah. He's saying, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. Can I hear you say good news to the poor? That's right. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners. Can I hear you say freedom for the prisoners? And recovery of sight for the blind. Recovery. Some of you are like, there's a lot underlined here, Drews. To set the oppressed free. Thank you. To proclaim the year of the Lord's favor.
The year of the Lord's favor.
That's right. Now, here's what Jesus is doing. He comes and he's basically like, this text, and again, we preached on this text. He says, it's fulfilled in your hearing. And so Jesus is basically, he's basically saying, I'm the fulfillment of all these promises, the freedom of captivity that you have longed for. That's who I am, and that's what I come to do. Now, could you imagine? It's in the small little town of Nazareth, and people are just like, really? What's this guy talking about? Who is this cat talking a big game? And yet Jesus has such an audacious claim. Now, here's what's interesting, because this passage, you might notice, he says, I come to bring good news to the poor, freedom for those who are oppressed, opening the eyes of the blind. Now, time and time again, throughout the Gospel of Luke, you'll see this thing, that God's heart is directed strongly and inclined and prefers, in many ways, the poor and the marginalized. A couple weeks ago, we talked about how Jesus would teach, blessed are the poor. And he says, woe to you who are rich. Now, I just want you to know that theme of God's heart for the poor and the marginalized is continually brought up in the Gospel of Luke. That theme runs throughout the scriptures, and Jesus himself, he would make such audacious claims about this. Now, this is why this is so explosive, though, because in the ancient world, when people asked the question, who is God with? Most people would be like, no, God's not with the poor. He's with the rich and the powerful. He's with the popular and the beautiful. That's who God is with. And yet, time and time again, Jesus comes on the scene. He's like, no, you've got it all wrong. God's heart, his presence, is with the poor, the oppressed, the marginalized. If you've ever known the experience of being in the underclass, he says, that's who God is with. Now, again, in the ancient world, people are like, oh yeah, well, God is with the rich and the powerful. That's who he's with. And Jesus is like, no, woe to you who are rich. Now, here's the thing. Do you see how upending that was to the ancient world? People are like, what? What is he talking about? See, but if it's not even in the ancient world, it's also for the modern world. I mean, isn't that what we believe? If we were to ask this question, you don't even have to be religious. And we were to ask the question, who is God with? What class of people has God blessed? Most people go, oh yeah, it is with the rich, the powerful, those with influence. That's who God is with. And yet Jesus is upending this. Now, you got to imagine that for me then, a part of me is, as I've been thinking about this theme that runs throughout the Gospel of Luke, with God's preferential heart for the poor and the marginalized, what does it mean for us as a community here in Midtown Manhattan? Honestly, there's a part of me that feels a little bit guilty sometimes. I'm like, gosh, Jesus talks about poverty and money so much, and here we are in arguing the most expensive zip code in the most expensive city in the whole wide world. Like, do I have to call people in our community to take a vow of poverty and that God is not with them unless they take this vow? Well, you know what's so interesting about the gospel accounts? Again, Jesus is upending the world's systems, and he's talking about God's heart for the poor. But notice in the passage that was preached last week, look at this story that comes up in Luke chapter 7. Look at what it says. It says the centurion. Now, who is a centurion? A centurion was actually a Roman soldier who he himself was over 80 to 100 other soldiers. In other words, and Rome was actually the oppressor of the Jews. So the Roman Empire, do you get this? Here's a commander as a centurion over a number of different soldiers who has incredible authority. And as someone with authority, it says, look what it says. The centurion heard of Jesus and sent some elders of the Jews to him, asking him to come and heal his servant. Do you see what's happening? Here's a centurion who's actually part of the oppressor class. He's got power, authority. If anything, he's the person that, woe is that person, someone with power. But not only does he have power, he has power even with the elders of the Jews. The elders of the Jews are the ones who go on behalf of him. And notice what happens. It says, asking him to come and heal his servant. When they came to Jesus, the elders, they pleaded earnestly with Jesus. And notice what they say. This man deserves. The word for deserve is the same word for is worthy. This man is worthy. He deserves to have you do this because he's a centurion. He's a person in authority. He's an important person. But not only that, check out these other clue that these elders talk about the centurion. He says, because he loves our nation and has built our synagogues. Do you see what's happening? This centurion, he's worthy. The reason why he's worthy is because not only is he a commander over other soldiers, but he's also someone he's actually been friendly to the Jews. He's someone that even the leaders amongst the Jews are basically saying, Jesus, listen, if there's any cat that's worthy of this, it's this cat. He is worthy for you to move on behalf of him. Can you please heal his servant? Now, here's what's so stunning about this. Because again, in the previous passages, there's this consistent heart for God's heart is for the poor. God's heart was for the marginalized, the oppressed. And here, all of a sudden, here's someone from the Romans. The Roman power system, which is their military. And what happens in this miracle is that Jesus actually works on behalf of the centurion as well. Now, here's what this reveals. What it reveals is this, is that God's grace is actually with the poor and the rich. God's grace is actually with the weak and the powerful. God's grace is with the outsider and the insider. You've got instances of Jesus, he's talking about God's heart for the poor and the marginal. And then you have a centurion, someone who has military might and power. And notice Jesus works, his grace is available to both. Now here's the question, what's the common thread then? If that's the case, if God's grace is for the poor and the rich, the weak and the powerful, the outsider and the insider, what is the common thread? Now the common thread, of course, look at what happens. What is it about this centurion that spurs on this heart that goes out to this person? Look at what the centurion says. After these elders come and say, this man deserves to have you do this because he loves our nation and has built our synagogue. When Jesus is on his way to the house to work and to heal this servant, it says he was not far from the house when the centurion sent friends to say to him, Lord, don't trouble yourself. The Jewish elders are basically, if anyone deserves it, it's this guy. And here the centurion is like, listen, Jesus, I do not deserve this. I am not worthy of this. To have you come under my roof, that is why I did not even consider myself worthy to come to you. Do you catch this? The centurion, as powerful and wealthy, and the role of grace is extended to the centurion. It's because the centurion, when everyone else is like, this man deserves it, he's the guy that's basically, no, I do not deserve this. I'm not worthy. And it's that kind of faith that Jesus actually commends. So what is the through line then for the poor and the rich? What is the through line for the weak and the powerful, for the outsider and the insider? It's that God's grace is for the humble. For those who humble themselves, it doesn't matter what your background might be, how wealthy or how poor you might be. God's grace is for the humble. Now, here's the thing. But the reality is, those who are poor, oppressed, exiled, which is a story of most of the history of Israel, enslaved, the story of being on the underside. That's the story of God's people often. One spiritual writer, he once said that God's address is at the end of your rope. That's where you can find God, at the end of your rope. It's only when people are willing to humble themselves. Now, here's the thing. When you're poor, exiled, oppressed, blind, usually it's a little bit easier to find yourself at the end of your rope. I let go of my self-reliance because I realize I need God. I desperately need God. But here's the thing. For the rich and the powerful, it's much harder to take this kind of stance that the centurion takes. This stance of, actually, I'm not worthy. Why? Because honestly, to make it in this town, to make it in this city, if you can make it here, you can make it anywhere. And honestly, most of you all, educated, smart, make a lot of money, ascendant, went to great schools, multiple degrees. Like, honestly, it's probably easiest for people who are well-adjusted. It's like, yo, we live in Manhattan. It's so easy for me to become so self-reliant, so self-justified, thinking I have it all together. And yet the one through line of God's grace is that it's for the humble. And it's hardest for the wealthy, the powerful, to actually be like, I'm actually at the end of my rope. Instead, most of us are like, I'm not at the end of my rope. You know how smart I am? You know where I went to school? You know these connections that I have? You know how ascendant I am? You know how I'm getting these promotions in my career? You know how I'm young and ambitious? Now, we may not say these things out loud, but do you see, it's so difficult for people, especially with people with talent and gifts, to actually admit, I need help. I need God. Which brings us then to this story. Because check out what happens in the story that was read earlier. Look at what it says. It says, when one of the Pharisees, and the Pharisees were the religious leaders who had the clout and the knowledge and the positions of power within the Jewish system. It says, when one of the Pharisees invited Jesus to have dinner with him, he went to the Pharisee's house and reclined at the table. This was a very common practice, to recline at the table. That's how people ate. And then it says, a woman in that town who lived a sinful life. Now it says this because this is what this woman was known for, to being someone who lived a sinful life, learned that Jesus was eating at the Pharisee's house, so she came there with an alabaster jar of perfume. As she stood behind him at his feet weeping, she began to wet his feet with her tears. Then she wiped them with her hair, kissed them, and poured perfume on them. Now, can you imagine just how scandalous this looks? Everyone's like, what? Started to wash Jesus' feet with her hair, kissing his feet, and now pouring perfume on it. And notice what it says. When the Pharisees who had invited him saw this, he said to himself, could you imagine? He says, if this man were a prophet, he's talking about Jesus, he would know who is touching him and what kind of woman she is, that she, I can't believe this guy. Who does Jesus think she is? Does he know what kind of woman this is? Now, notice what happens. Jesus answered him, Simon, I have something to tell you. It's like, oh, snap. Tell me, teacher, he said. 2 people owed money to a certain moneylender. One owed him 500 denarii. A denarii was a day's wages. Worth a day's wage. So 500, so let's just say a year and a half of wages that this man owes. And it said owed 50 denarii. So do you see, someone owes 10 times more in debt, and then neither of them had the money to pay him back. So he forgave the debts of both. Now, which of that will love him more? Jesus asks. Simon replied, I suppose the one who had the bigger debt. They've been forgiven much more deeply and much more significantly. You have judged correctly, Jesus said. Now notice what Jesus does. He takes this parable and look at what happens. It says, then he turned toward the woman and said to Simon, do you see this woman? I came into your house. You did not give me any water for my feet, but she wet my feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair. You didn't give me a kiss, but this woman, from the time I entered, has not stopped kissing my feet. You did not put oil on my head, but she has poured perfume on my feet. Therefore, I tell you, her many sins have been forgiven, as her great love has shown. But whoever has been forgiven loves little. Then Jesus said to her, your sins are forgiven, to the woman. The other guests began to say among us, who is this who even forgives sins? How could Jesus even say this? Jesus said to the woman, your faith has saved you. Go in peace. I mean, do you see the story? Here, the same through line comes up again. There's the Pharisee who has the power and the clout, especially as a Jewish leader, who knows the scriptures. And there's this woman who's there broken by life, who recognizes, and in fact, that's her reputation. People know her as a sinful person, has lived a sinful life. And yet that doesn't stop her from expressing her love in the fullest and deepest of ways. And notice what Jesus says about her. Therefore, I tell you, her many sins have been forgiven. Don't you see? Like she recognized just the extent of her sins that have been forgiven, as her great love has shown. But whoever has been forgiven little loves little. I mean, do you see what he's basically saying? If you think you don't have to be forgiven for anything, if you're talented enough, then yeah, of course you're not going to need God. You're not going to need God's love. You're not going to feel loved by God because you've got this on your own. Do you see what Jesus is saying? It's only those who can actually get in touch with the extent to which they are forgiven and loved by God. Now, there's no mistake. You know what's so interesting is that Jesus' harshest critiques, not only here, but throughout the gospel accounts, are often towards Pharisees, the religious leaders. Religious leaders, I mean, today's equivalent of religious leaders are pastors like me. That's not fun. But, you know, my experience as a pastor, honestly, is that the reality is my own spiritual adult, because I'm like, you know what, I've studied this before, I've read this passage before. Like, I got a master's degree in this. You know, in fact, I've got multiple degrees in theology. And just, I can think like, oh, it's okay. I know that preaching move. I know what sounds good. I've preached this text before. And you can almost see, even in my own life, how the living kind of love of God that forgives us. All of a sudden, I can actually just find myself in places where, listen, I know this already. I don't love. Oftentimes, it's hardest for religious types, for the people who have done the right things and has the title as pastor, to actually really experience the love of God. I remember there was this one gathering I went to with pastors, and it was for pastors, and it was an invitation to get pastors to pray. And I know that sounds kind of silly, but sometimes it can be easy to be in my role and to not pray. So I went to this gathering, and believe it or not, just like many other industries, like when pastors are with other pastors, we're usually like, you know, greeting everyone, but secretly thinking like, oh, how do I measure up with everyone else here? Of course, we would never say that out loud. Anyhow, but you know, so there's like this, you know, there's a little bit of like, oh yeah, how are things going at your church, right? There's like this, almost like this contending competitiveness that occurs even amongst ministry leaders. Sorry. And so here I am at this gathering, and then we all sit down. It's a small gathering, maybe 30 folks or so. And then at this gathering, the person who's speaking is encouraging us as pastors. You know, the key to kind of like is, will each of us just humble ourselves and begin to seek God in prayer? You know, and like as he's talking, I'm just kind of like, oh yeah, I know that move. I know that move. Like I know that exhortation to get people to pray. Like I got it, you know. And then he's basically like, you know what? With your bodies, if you can embody a way of just showing your need for God with your body. And so I was just like, bodies, you know, I'm like, I know that move too. So like all of a sudden I'm just like, okay, and while he's preaching this, all I can keep thinking in my mind is like, okay, Drew, just try to focus and like stop evaluating and stop thinking like, oh, I know that move, right? So basically, as he's talking, he's just like, with your body. So I close my eyes. I'm just like, I open up my hand. If I'm like, God, I need you. And then get on your knees and pray. So I was like, I know that move too. And I say, okay. So that I just kind of, and then I just need to close my eyes to just keep my focus on what's happening, like on God. I'm just like, God, I need you. I need you. And I just start praying. I'm like, God, help me to be desperate for you. But then all of a sudden, like, I open my eyes. And so I remember I was like, I'm so ridiculous. so strange. How? I can be so resistant. Humbly confessing that I need God. Because I've got degrees, I'm a pastor of a church. There's all these ways in which I just become so self-reliant, so self-justifying. I've been a Christian for so many years. You know what's amazing is if you would actually trace the story of the Apostle Paul, who wrote a significant part of the New Testament, and he had a dramatic conversion from faith, and then he actually would write letters as he would help start churches throughout kind of the Roman Empire, preaching the good news of Jesus, often at the expense of his own health and the New Testament scriptures from. What's interesting, if you were to trace at the Apostle Paul, at what he writes to different churches in different stages of his life, you see this common theme that occurs time and time again. Look at this. Check out in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verses 9 to 10. This is in circa AD 53 to 55. This worthy to be called an apostle because I persecuted the church of God. He's so well aware that if you know anything about the life of the Apostle Paul, he was someone that before he had this radical conversion and this eyewitness encounter with Jesus, that I am the least unworthy, but by the grace of God, I am what I am. That's what he writes in this first letter to the church in Corinth. Look at what he writes in the second letter to the church in Corinth, 2 Corinthians chapter 12, circa AD 55 to 56. He talks about this thorn that's given in his flesh. It's like he's gone through suffering and difficulty, even though he's worked and has met God in such a personal way. Look at what he says. He says, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. For when I'm weak, then I'm strong. Do you see the through light in his writing? And we don't know. Theologians have wrestled with what is that thorn in the flesh that Paul is talking about. We don't know. All we know is it goes on. His letter to the church in Rome, Romans chapter 7, circa AD 56 to 58. Look at what he said. For I know that nothing good dwells in me. Wait, Paul, you're the super apostle. What do you mean nothing good dwells in you? That is in my flesh. He's not discounting the image of God. He's basically saying, in this part of me, there's nothing good that dwells in me. For I do not do the good I want, but the evil I do not want is what I keep on doing. Do you see with remarkable self-awareness, he's able to point out, oh my goodness, I still struggle with things. Apostle or not, church leader or not, we're broken men. Now notice at the end of his life, in his letter to Timothy, 1 Timothy chapter 1, AD 62 to 64, look at what he says about himself. Christ Jesus came into the world to save sinners, of whom I am the foremost. Isn't this incredible? Here the Apostle Paul, you see in the arc of his journey, as he continues to grow, not only in leadership, but also in age. What happens to him is, does he get puffed up and thinks he's got it all together? He actually becomes more of a broken man. To the point where he's basically like, listen, I am the worst of sinners. If anyone has to say, and I am the worst of sinners, there's a humility and a brokenness that has marked him throughout his life. You know, one of the environments that I appreciate going to, and I would attend at different times in earlier seasons of my life, mostly because I have a personality that can be addictive at various times. And I've talked about this before, is a 12-step movement. Now, alcohol wasn't my addiction of choice, but nonetheless, I would go to these meetings because, again, I knew that there were parts of me that needed to be healed around different addictive behaviors. And so one of the things that I love about going to these 12-step meetings is what's incredible. If you were to go to a meeting right around here, you would see someone, for instance, who's houseless, who's coming in off the street and coming into this meeting, but struggling to stay sober, and will join the meeting. And then you'll see a Wall Street executive who also has hit rock bottom when it comes to their addiction and the way that it's affected their family. And they will also show up dressed in a power suit at this meeting. And what's so incredible is that no matter the station of life that someone is in, each person comes to the meeting. And for instance, I would come to the meeting, and if this were me and I were part of the meeting, I would say, "Hi, my name is Drew, and I'm an alcoholic," or whatever the addiction of choice is that is this meeting is about. "Hi, my name is Drew, and I'm an alcoholic," and everyone would basically say, "Hi, Drew." And what's so, in many ways, dignifying is that everyone who comes, whether you're houseless or whether you're someone who's coming in making a ton of money, everyone comes and they're basically introducing themselves as, "Hi, my name is Drew, and I'm an alcoholic." The leveling playing field is our own humility, our own brokenness, our own addiction. And step one is I admit I'm powerless and I need a higher power. And so as a result, there's this humility that's laced throughout. Now, here's what's crazier about these meetings. So someone could come into this meeting and be like, "Hi, my name is Drew, I'm an alcoholic, and I've been sober for 30 minutes. And what's interesting is that people will still listen in a supportive way to my own journey and what I'm going through in that moment. Even if I've just said, "I've been sober for 30 minutes. And then someone else will speak and be like, "Hi, my name is, Bill, and I'm an alcoholic. And I've been sober for 30 years. Now, there's a part of me, when I first heard that, I was like, 30 years? Why are you still here? Like, listen, you beat this. If there's anyone that's beat this, the 30-minute guy should be here. You should probably, you're okay to no longer be part of these meetings. But see, don't just, the reason why the person that's been there for 30 years is still there is because they continue to admit that they're powerless. They continue to admit. The minute that I think that I've solved it, the minute that I think I got this, that I'm self-reliant enough, that's the minute that I'm most susceptible to actually falling back into my addiction. And in the same way, there's this thread of humility, a humility of being willing to say, "God, I need you." What does it mean for each one of us to actually confess, "I don't want to be self-reliant, I need you"? But the problem is, so many of us, you're wealthy, you're smart, you're educated, come from a great background, you're good looking, and all this stuff, and we're young, and so it's so easy to think that we don't need God. God's grace is for everyone, friends. But when grace is for everyone, it's only for those who are humble enough to admit that they need Him. And the question for me and for you, have we been humbled enough to say, "God, I need you"? I drew out some pictures. If you can get over the sophisticated nature of these drawings, hopefully you can stay with me. Okay, so here's a picture. Here's my picture of kind of what many people think related to the Christian life. They think the Christian life is kind of like this. And what I mean about the Christian life is at the top right is a theta, which in Greek is theta. It stands for theos, which is God. So let's say God is at the top, And then at the bottom, you see this kind of like orange, that's supposed to be fire. So like that's the other place where God is not, okay? So if God's at the top, and most of us, when we think about our lives, we're like, "Yeah, I'm not like evil. And I'm not like perfect. I'm like somewhere in the middle." I mean, this is what most of us think. And so that's where I am, right in the middle, and this is kind of our life with God. And then when we become Christians, we meet and encounter God in a unique way. Then what happens is we think of our journey that looks a little bit like this, right? Like we're trying to reach God, but then, I keep struggling the same way Paul did. I keep doing what I don't want to do. What's wrong with me? Then I get back on the saddle and try again. And I'm basically trying, it's this struggle to try to reach God. I mean, this is how most of us think of our lives. One day it's 2 steps forward. The other day it's 3 steps back. One day it's 4 steps forward. The other day it's 2 steps back. I mean, isn't this how most of us see our lives? Now, you know what's interesting? Is that the journey of the Apostle Paul that I just read about, what you look at his letters, his journey actually doesn't look like that. You know what his journey looks like? It looks more like this. It looks more like, man, I am unworthy of you, Paul says. Man, I keep doing what I don't want to do, and I don't do what I want to do. And at the end of his life, he's like, I'm just the worst of all sinners. First and foremost. Now, isn't that interesting? As Paul grows in his faith, he becomes more aware of his brokenness, his neediness for God. He's humbled in a more desperate way. Now, some of you are like, I don't want to become a Christian, man. That sounds intense. See, but here's the beauty of the Christian story. You see, the more we become aware of our sins, this is also what we become aware of if we go to the next slide. It's supposed to be a cross. The more I realize how sinful I am, the bigger the cross becomes. Because Paul says, oh my goodness, I do what I don't want to do, and I don't do what I want to do. And you know what he says? As he's in this war within himself, he says, therefore, there's no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. And you see then, for Paul, he's more aware of the sin, but now he's more aware of the power with the cross. The power that Jesus would die for him, even when he's at his worst. So could you imagine, at the end of his life, he's like, I'm the worst of all sinners. Which basically means that God is the best of all gods. Because the cross is so big. And the more you see yourself as broken and humble, the more we can appreciate, the more we can say, gosh, God, I have been forgiven much, and therefore I love much. The bigger the cross becomes, the more we begin to realize just how sinful we are. And if the cross becomes bigger, if we can go to the next slide, kind of cheesy, but nonetheless, the heart gets buried. I like to use, there's a heart, otherwise. Just, Oh, you saw that. Thank you. All right. Yes. The love of God gets bigger. And even big. Tim Keller puts it this way. You are more sinful than you dare to believe. But you are more loved and you dare to hope. You see, it's both of these things. As we're talking about humility, I mean, some of you are probably like, does it mean I have to debase myself and let people walk over? No, not at all. Because when you embrace that you are more sinful than you dare to believe and more love than you dare to hope, here's what happens. You become both humble and fierce. Because you live with the freedom, you live with the humility, you live with the power of knowing the beautiful, magnificent love of God. And friends, that is good news. But here's where it starts. It starts when you're finally able to surrender. When you're finally able, like this woman who's been forgiven so much, when you're finally able to say, God, I realize how deeply I've been forgiven. I humble myself. I recognize my need for you. And then you can receive the magnificent, overwhelming, indescribable, invincible love of God.